No one is coming to save you. Excuses are seductive because they shift blame. They allow you to point the finger outward at your circumstances, your past, your parents, society, fate. But the hard truth is this: nothing changes until you accept full, radical responsibility for your life. You may not be to blame for what broke you, but you are responsible for what you do next. Excuses keep you comfortable, but they also keep you weak. I will bow and stop privation hires. You don't need perfect conditions to begin. You need courage to stop waiting for them. There is a brutal but liberating truth at the heart of this conversation. And it's this: no one is coming to save you. No parent, no politician, no friend, no divine lightning bolt is going to appear on a quiet Tuesday to lift you out of your suffering, your dysfunction, your procrastination, or your underperformance. And it's not because the world is cruel or indifferent, though sometimes it can be. It's because your life at its core is yours. That's the moral structure of existence. You have to carry the burden. And you have to carry it willingly. When people hear that, they often resist. They say, "But I've had a hard life," or "You don't understand what I've been through," or "This isn't my fault." And they're right, at least partially. There are things that are genuinely not your fault. So, you didn't choose your parents. You didn't ask for certain traumas. You didn't write the rules of the system. But here's the psychological trap. If you build your identity around what happened to you, instead of what you choose to do next, then where pain becomes your prison, and you hold the key the whole time. Taking responsibility doesn't mean taking the blame for every injustice you've experienced. That would be a distortion, but it does mean this: whatever situation you're in right now, even the ones you did, cause. It's your responsibility to respond with strength and integrity. That's the hard truth. And ironically, it's also the most empowering. Why? Because responsibility is what gives your life meaning. Think about it. What separates the victim from the hero? Both suffer, both face challenges. But the hero doesn't wait for someone else to change the story. The hero acts. He carries the burden voluntarily. He stands up when it would be easier to stay down. He says, "This may not be my fault, but it is my problem, and I'm going to face it." He says, there's a deep psychological shift that occurs when you stop externalizing blame. You go from being reactive to being proactive. You stop being a puppet of your environment and start becoming an author of your life. And that's when momentum builds. That's when clarity sharpens. You stop wasting energy defending your excuses and start investing into your evolution. Now, I'm not romanticizing this. Taking radical responsibility is excruciating. It means you stop lying to yourself. You stop exaggerating your limitations to justify your inaction. You stop seeking sympathy as a substitute for progress. You confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding: the laziness, the resentment, the entitlement, the fear, and none of that feels good. It's a death of sorts, the death of the excuse maker, but it's also the birth of something far more powerful: the accountable individual. Here's the irony: the people with the most reasons to make excuses, the ones who've been truly hurt, betrayed, marginalized, they're also the ones who can become the most powerful if they take ownership, because their adversity becomes their edge, their suffering becomes their strength, but only if they stop waiting to be rescued. One of the most dangerous myths in modern culture is the idea that you can be rescued, that someone else can do the hard part for you. We reinforce it in subtle ways. We coddle instead of challenge. We enable instead of confront. We mistake comfort for care. And so people stay stuck spiritually because they're waiting for the world to make things easier instead of making themselves stronger. That stands hands. But the truth is, you are capable of so much more than you think. You don't need perfect circumstances. You need courage, you need discipline, you need to say, enough. I've blamed my past long enough. I've waited long enough. Now it's on me. That shift right there, that's when transformation begins. So ask yourself honestly, where are you making excuses right now? Where are you avoiding responsibility by telling yourself the story that you're helpless, unlucky, or unworthy? And what would your life look like if you dropped that story? What if you took one area, just one, and said, no more excuses. From this point forward, I own this completely? Because the life you want, the strength, the clarity, the respect, it's on the other side of that decision. It's not reserved for the lucky or the gifted. It's reserved for those who are willing to stop outsourcing their power and start showing up as the authors of their own lives. You don't need someone to save you. You need to save yourself with discipline, with truth, and with responsibility. That's not just how you grow. That's how you rise. But they only ensure stagnation. When you make an excuse, you're not just avoiding action, you're convincing yourself that growth is unsafe, that staying where you are is wiser than risking discomfort. But excuses are not shields, they are cages. They trap you in the very thing you're trying to escape from. Growth requires sacrifice, especially the sacrifice of your favorite justifications. Some people stay stuck not because they're trapped, but because their excuses feel safer than freedom. Let's be honest about why we make excuses. And I don't mean the superficial reasons, not the I'm too busy or it's just not the right time. Those are surface level. Underneath all of that, excuses are usually a form of self-protection. Psychological armor. They serve a function to insulate us from failure, judgment, disappointment, or pain. And that's important to understand, because if you don't see why excuses are seductive, you won't understand why they're so hard to give up. Had the uncomfortable vocabulary? Can't. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't stay stuck because they're lazy. They stay stuck because they're scared. Scared of what they might discover about themselves if they tried and failed. Scared of what others might say if they stepped out and stumbled. Scared that even their best effort won't be enough. And that fear is real. I'm not dismissing it, but it's also a lie that feels true. Excuses don't usually scream, they whisper. Be careful. Not yet. Let's just wait a little longer. And because those whispers sound rational, we mistake them for wisdom. But here's the paradox. What we think is protecting us is actually imprisoning us. We build walls to feel safe and then forget we're the ones who built them. We wear masks to avoid vulnerability and then wonder why no one really knows us. We postpone decisions to avoid discomfort and then complain that nothing's changing. It's a cycle, a closed loop. And the longer we stay in it, the more our life shrinks around us. Every excuse you make reinforces a belief about your limits. And the mind adapts to repetition. If you tell yourself for weeks, months, years that you can't do something because of your past, your resources, your personality, your circumstances, eventually that excuse becomes a part of your identity. And once something is part of your identity, it becomes sacred. You stop questioning it, you defend it. You even get angry when someone challenges it. That's how deep the roots of an excuse can grow. So what's the cost of this illusion of safety? The cost is your potential. The cost is your growth, because you cannot become stronger without facing resistance. And resistance, by definition, is uncomfortable. Think of a muscle. If you never apply force to it, if you never strain it beyond its current capacity, it will never grow. The same is true for your character, your intellect, your resilience. With sows, if you keep avoiding the weights, the emotional, mental, or spiritual weights, then you remain exactly where you are. Comfortable, yes, but stagnant, dormant, unfulfilled. Now, some people might say, but it's not that easy. I've been through real pain. I know. I'm not denying that. But again, the point isn't whether your pain is valid. The point is whether you're willing to stay defined by it. And there's a difference. Pain can inform you, but excuses let pain control you. That's the danger. That's where stagnation begins. Not with the hardship itself, but with the story you tell yourself about what that hardship allows you to avoid. And you can see this in people's lives. You can feel it in conversations. There's a heaviness to someone who's been making the same excuse for too long. A kind of resignation, a dullness in the eyes, in the posture, in the tone. Not because they're incapable, but because they've accepted a version of themselves that's too small. They've made peace with the cage. They've confused comfort with peace. But deep down, they know there's a voice, sometimes faint, sometimes screaming, that says, this isn't all you're meant for. The tragedy is that many ignore that voice for years. They get good at suppressing it. They rationalize, they distract. They compare themselves to people doing even less and say, I guess I'm doing okay. But mediocrity is not a benchmark, and not terrible is not the same thing as fulfilled. If your life feels numb, if your days feel repetitive, if there's a quiet ache in your chest that says something's missing, listen to it. That ache is truth. That ache is potential knocking. And the antidote, it's not a magical plan. It's not a guru. It's not a seminar. It's brutal honesty. It's sitting down with yourself and asking, it's sitting down with yourself and asking, what excuse am I using to stay small? What lie am I telling myself to justify my fear? And then you act. You do the opposite. You lean in instead of pulling away. You take the call. You write the page, you speak the truth. You commit before you feel ready. Because here's the truth. You will never feel ready. Not completely. Not if you're doing something meaningful. Readiness is a myth. You create it through action, not waiting. And the more you act in the face of fear, the quieter the excuses become. They don't disappear, but they lose their power. Because now you are the one in charge. So the question is simple, but urgent. Will you let your excuses protect you from pain, or will you let your courage pull you toward purpose? That decision will shape the rest of your life. What you say becomes what you believe. When you say, I can't, I'm not ready, or I would, but you're not just making statements, you're writing a story. And if you repeat that story long enough, your identity will start to match it. Excuses are not just about behavior, they are about self-perception. If you want to live differently, speak differently. Cut the justifications. Replace them with declarations. Every excuse you speak etches itself into the architecture of your self-worth. You cannot move forward in life if you're not brutally honest with yourself about where you stand. That's not a judgment, it's a fact. You cannot build strength on a lie. You cannot construct a meaningful existence on top of a false. If your foundation is denial, the whole thing collapses under pressure, and life will bring pressure. Tui precosti, then self-honesty, then isn't optional. It's essential. But here's the catch. It's also rare. Most people live behind layers of self-deception, carefully constructed to avoid discomfort. They craft narratives that protect their ego. I'm doing fine. I'll get serious tomorrow. It's not my fault. And the longer those stories are repeated, the more convincing they become. Not just to others, but to themselves. But let's not confuse comfort with truth. There is nothing noble about lying to yourself just because it softens the blow. Real self-respect, the kind that builds character and confidence, only begins When you're willing to face who you are without flinching. That means confronting your flaws, your fears, your failures, not to shame yourself, Young's failures, but to understand the terrain you're standing on. If you don't know where you are, how can you possibly get to where you want to be? Think of a map. If you open a map and say, I want to get to that mountain, the first question the guide will ask you is, okay, where are you now? You will and if you lie about your current position, you'll never arrive. You'll get lost. Not because you're incapable, but because your entire journey is based on fiction. That's what many people are doing with their lives. They're chasing goals with no accurate sense of their current state, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, practically, and then wondering why they feel disoriented or frustrated. So what does self-honesty actually look like? It looks like sitting alone in a quiet room and asking questions that hurt. Am I really giving my best effort, or am I hiding behind distractions? Do I want change, or do I just want the appearance of ambition? Am I truly a victim in this situation, or have I contributed to the problem? These are hard questions, but they're also the beginning of clarity. And once you start being honest, something else happens. Your excuses begin to dissolve, because most excuses require a certain level of self-deception to exist. If you admit that you're capable of more, then saying, I don't have time no longer works. If you recognize that you're afraid, not busy, then procrastination reveals itself for what it is, a coping mechanism, not a schedule issue. Self-honesty strips away the fog. It sharpens your vision, and vision is power. There's also a spiritual element to this. When you're honest with yourself, you align your internal world with reality. That's no small thing. You stop trying to bend reality to fit your comfort and instead begin shaping your character to meet reality on its own terms. That is the path of maturity. That is the path of transformation. And that's the path almost no one teaches because it's painful. But pain with purpose is the birthplace of growth. You know, we often think growth is about adding things, adding knowledge, adding habits, adding achievements. But often the most important kind of growth is subtractive. It's about stripping away the layers of illusion. It's about unlearning the lies you've told yourself, the ones about what you can't do, or who you'll never be, or why your circumstances define you. Self-honesty doesn't inflate your ego. It dismantles the mask so that the mask so that your true self, flawed but capable, can finally step forward. And when that happens, something powerful shifts inside you. You stop needing external validation because now you know who you are. You stop comparing because you're too focused on confronting your own reflection. You stop fearing failure because you realize that facing the truth, not avoiding it, is the real victory. That's where inner strength begins. And no one can take that from you. But it all starts with that moment of truth. That moment where you stop pointing the finger outward and turn it inward. That's not weakness. That's radical courage. Because once you're honest with yourself, no one else can weaponize the truth against you. You already own it. You faced it. And that gives you authority over your own life. So ask yourself today, not later, not when it's convenient. Today, what truth about myself am I avoiding? Is it your work ethic, your relationships, your health, your fear of rejection? Whatever it is, name it. And then begin the process of changing it. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now, because the longer you delay that confrontation, the longer you stay a stranger to your own potential. You can't build a powerful life on top of a lie. And the truth, however uncomfortable, is the first brick in the foundation of freedom. Own it, and everything changes. Efforts changes up relations, especially when the voice in your head says a not today. Everyone feels resistance. Everyone hears that internal whisper saying, maybe tomorrow. The difference is that disciplined people act anyway. They feel the fear, the fatigue, the doubt, and they move through it. Excuses will always have perfect timing. They show up right before your breakthrough. Your job is to ignore them and move forward, not perfectly, but consistently. Your excuses are loudest right before your next level. Silence them with action. There's a fundamental truth about human existence that we can't afford to ignore. Responsibility is the price of freedom. You cannot live a life of purpose, of dignity, of meaning without shouldering responsibility. And you cannot live a life of excuses while doing so. The two are mutually exclusive. Responsibility confronts excuses head on. It doesn't negotiate with them. It eradicates them. Now, that might sound intense, and it should, because we're not talking about trivial matters. We're talking about the structure of your life, about the architecture of your soul. If you avoid responsibility, you're not just avoiding chores or obligations. You're avoiding the very mechanism that transforms potential into reality. And if you live in that avoidance long enough, your sense of who you are will begin to decay. Excuses are attractive because they relieve you of the burden of responsibility. They allow you to cast blame on something or someone else. They whisper, "This isn't your fault. You can't help it. You didn't have a choice." And in the short term, those messages feel comforting. But comfort isn't the same as growth. And over time, what initially feels like relief becomes a prison. Because if you're not responsible for your situation, you're also not capable of changing it. That's the lie underneath every excuse, that you are powerless. And that's the most dangerous belief a person could carry. Because if you believe you're powerless, then you will act accordingly. You'll settle. You'll shrink. You'll wait for someone else to fix your life. But no one is coming. That's not meant to discourage you. That's meant to liberate you. Because if no one is coming, that means it's up to you. And that realization is the beginning of strength.